The years leading up to 1975 were a period of great difficulty for India. Following the triumphant victory in the 1971 war against Pakistan, which led to the creation of Bangladesh, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was at the peak of her popularity. She was hailed as a strong and decisive leader, almost like a goddess by some of her supporters. However, this wave of celebration did not last long. The country soon found itself grappling with severe economic problems. The war had been very expensive, and it was followed by a global oil crisis in 1973. This crisis caused the price of oil to skyrocket, which in turn made almost everything else more expensive. India, heavily dependent on imported oil, was hit very hard by this international event. The economic troubles began to affect the daily lives of ordinary Indians in profound ways. Inflation, which is the rate at which prices for goods and services rise, reached alarming levels. It was over 20% in 1974, making it difficult for families to afford basic necessities like food, clothing, and fuel. At the same time, industrial growth slowed down, leading to fewer jobs and widespread unemployment, especially among the educated youth. To make matters worse, a severe drought struck several parts of the country, causing food shortages and pushing millions of people into deeper poverty. These economic hardships created a growing sense of frustration and anger among the population, who had earlier celebrated Indira Gandhi's leadership with such enthusiasm. This widespread economic discontent soon translated into social and political unrest. Workers in factories and government offices became increasingly restless. In 1974, a massive railway strike brought the entire country to a standstill. Led by the socialist leader George Fernandez, millions of railway workers stopped work, demanding better wages and working conditions. The government responded with great force, arresting thousands of strike leaders and workers. While the strike was eventually crushed, it left a deep scar on the nation's political landscape. It showed that large sections of the population were willing to directly challenge the authority of the central government, signaling a significant shift in the public mood from adulation to opposition. Amidst this turmoil, the political atmosphere became highly charged. The opposition parties, which had been weakened after the 1971 elections, saw an opportunity in the growing public anger. They started to organize protests and demonstrations against the government's handling of the economy and rising corruption. In the state of Gujarat, a student-led movement against corruption in the state government became so powerful that it forced the dissolution of the state assembly. This success in Gujarat inspired similar movements in other parts of the country. India, which had seemed so stable and united just a few years earlier, was now a nation simmering with discontent, setting the stage for a major confrontation with its powerful leader. As discontent spread across India, a respected and elderly leader emerged from political retirement to guide the opposition. This was Jayaprakash Narayan, popularly known as JP. He was a veteran freedom fighter who had worked alongside Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Disillusioned with party politics, JP had dedicated his life to social work for many years. However, seeing the growing corruption, economic hardship, and what he perceived as a drift towards authoritarianism under Indira Gandhi, he felt compelled to return to public life. He called for a total revolution, a complete transformation of Indian society, economy, and politics. His message resonated deeply with students, the middle class, and all those who were unhappy with the state of the nation. The movement led by Jayaprakash Narayan, known as the JP movement, gained significant momentum, especially in the state of Bihar. Following the example of the Gujarat protests, students in Bihar launched a massive agitation against the corrupt state government. JP agreed to lead this movement, but on the condition that it remained completely non-violent. Under his leadership, the protests grew into a powerful force that challenged not just the state government but also the central authority of Indira Gandhi. He accused her government of being anti-democratic, corrupt, and failing to solve the problems of the poor. His call for a total revolution was a demand for systemic change, aiming to clean up politics and empower the common people. The JP movement was significant because it brought together a wide range of political groups that were otherwise opposed to each other. Right-wing parties like the Jana Sangh, socialist parties, and even dissident members of the ruling Congress Party found common cause under JP's leadership. This created a united opposition front that Indira Gandhi had not faced before. JP traveled across the country, addressing huge rallies and urging people to rise up against the government. His moral authority and his past as a freedom fighter gave the movement a legitimacy that was hard to dismiss. He became the symbol of resistance, the conscience of a nation that felt its democratic values were under threat. The climax of this growing confrontation arrived in June 1975. At a massive rally in Delhi's Ramlila Maidan, Jayaprakash Narayan made a powerful and controversial speech. He appealed to the police and the army, asking them not to obey what he called the illegal and immoral orders of the government. For Indira Gandhi and her supporters, this was a direct call for rebellion, an attempt to incite mutiny and overthrow a democratically elected government. They saw it as a dangerous provocation that threatened the very stability of the country. For JP and his followers, however, it was a desperate plea to uphold the constitution and democracy against a leader who seemed determined to cling to power at any cost. This set the stage for a dramatic and decisive response from the Prime Minister. While the political storm was gathering on the streets, a legal battle was unfolding in the courts that would have even more direct consequences for Indira Gandhi. The case was filed by Narayan, a socialist leader who had lost the 1971 parliamentary election to Indira Gandhi from the Rai Bareli constituency in Uttar Pradesh. Narayan accused her of using corrupt electoral practices to win the election. He alleged that she had used government officials and machinery for her campaign, which was against the law. The case was heard in the Allahabad High Court, and for several years, it slowly made its way through the legal system. Most people did not expect it to amount to much, assuming the Prime Minister was beyond the reach of such a challenge. On June 12, 1975, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of the Allahabad High Court delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves across India. He found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractice. The charges were relatively minor. For instance, she was convicted for using the services of a government official to help with her campaign, and for using state police to build rostrums for her election rallies. However, the legal consequences were immense. The court declared her election to the Lok Sabha null and void. More significantly, it barred her from contesting any election or holding any elected post for a period of 6 years. This meant that she could no longer be a member of parliament, and therefore could not legally continue as the Prime Minister of India. The judgment was a stunning blow to Indira Gandhi's authority and prestige. It was the first time in India's history that a Prime Minister had been unseated by a court order. The opposition parties were jubilant. They saw the verdict as a moral victory and a confirmation of their claims that her government was corrupt. They immediately demanded her resignation. Leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan declared that she had lost the moral right to rule the country. The opposition planned a nationwide campaign of civil disobedience to force her to step down. The court's decision provided them with powerful legal and ethical ammunition, transforming their political agitation into a crusade for democratic principles. Indira Gandhi, however, was not prepared to give up power so easily. She immediately appealed the decision to the Supreme Court of India, the highest court in the land. While her appeal was pending, she needed the Supreme Court to grant her a stay on the High Court's order, which would allow her to continue as Prime Minister until the final verdict was delivered. On June 24, 1975, the Supreme Court granted her a conditional stay. Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer ruled that she could remain Prime Minister, but she could not vote in Parliament. This partial stay did little to resolve the political crisis. It created a situation of great uncertainty and left her in a legally vulnerable position, fueling the opposition's demands for her immediate and unconditional resignation. The Allahabad High Court verdict and the conditional stay from the Supreme Court placed Indira Gandhi in an extremely difficult and precarious position. The judgment had severely damaged her image as a powerful and invincible leader. For a politician who had built her career on projecting an aura of strength and popular support, being legally disqualified was a deep personal and political humiliation. She was faced with relentless pressure from the opposition, which was now more united and determined than ever. They saw this as their golden opportunity to remove her from power. Daily protests and calls for her resignation echoed across the country, creating an atmosphere of intense political crisis and instability. Adding to her fears was the growing dissent within her own Congress party. While many party members publicly swore loyalty to her, she knew that some senior leaders were privately unhappy with her leadership style. They felt sidelined by her and her close circle of advisors, particularly her younger son, Sanjay Gandhi. She worried that if she showed any sign of weakness, these internal rivals might seize the opportunity to challenge her for the leadership of the party and the country. The prospect of losing control over her own party was a significant fear. Her political survival depended on maintaining an iron grip, and any compromise, such as stepping down temporarily, could be seen as a fatal weakness. In this moment of crisis, Indira Gandhi turned to a small, close-knit group of advisors. This inner circle included her son Sanjay Gandhi, who was rapidly gaining influence, and Siddhartha Shankar Ray, the Chief Minister of West Bengal. They advised her against resigning. They argued that stepping down, even for a short period, would be a political disaster. They believed the opposition's goal was not just her resignation, but the complete destabilization of her government. They framed the situation not as a legal problem, but as a political conspiracy aimed at removing her from power through extra-constitutional means. This advice reinforced her own instincts to fight back rather than concede defeat. This fear of losing power, combined with the advice she received, pushed her towards a drastic and unprecedented solution. She became convinced that the ongoing protests and political chaos were part of a deep-rooted conspiracy that threatened national security and stability. The opposition's call for the army and police to disobey orders was presented as proof of this conspiracy. She began to believe that ordinary laws were not sufficient to handle this extraordinary situation. The idea of using the emergency provisions of the Constitution, which would grant the government sweeping powers, started to take shape as the only viable option to save her political career and, in her view, the nation itself. Convinced that her political survival and, honestly, the nation's stability were at stake, Indira Gandhi decided to take a decisive and extreme step. The Indian Constitution actually contained provisions for a state of emergency under Article 352. This article allowed the President, on the advice of the Cabinet, to declare an emergency if the security of India was threatened by war, external aggression, or what was called internal disturbance. Indira Gandhi and her advisors decided to invoke this clause, citing the ongoing protests, strikes, and the opposition's call for civil disobedience as a grave threat to internal stability. The plan was put into motion with great secrecy and, remarkable speed, bypassing normal democratic procedures and discussions. On the night of June 25, 1975, the plan was executed. Without consulting the full cabinet, Prime Minister Gandhi went to the President of India, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. She carried a draft proclamation of emergency and advised him to sign it immediately. The President, who was constitutionally bound to act on the advice of the Prime Minister, complied without question. At midnight, the proclamation was signed. With a stroke of the pen, India was placed under a state of emergency. The official reason given was that the country was facing a severe threat from internal disturbances that were undermining law and order and hindering economic development. The government claimed this drastic measure was necessary to protect democracy from those who were trying to destroy it from within. The declaration was a complete surprise to the nation and, honestly, even to most members of Indira Gandhi's own government. The cabinet was only informed of the decision at a meeting early on the morning of June 26th, after the proclamation had already been signed and key actions were already underway. There was no debate or discussion. The ministers were simply presented with a decision that had already been made. This method of declaration really highlighted the centralized and authoritarian nature of the decision-making process. The justification provided to the public was that a small but determined minority was conspiring to create chaos and anarchy, and that the government had a duty to take firm action to restore order and discipline. The real reasons for declaring the emergency, however, were deeply intertwined with Indira Gandhi's personal political crisis. The Allahabad High Court judgment had put her prime ministership in jeopardy. The united and relentless opposition, led by Jayaprakash Narayan, posed a direct challenge to her authority. By declaring an emergency, she could effectively neutralize all political opposition, silence criticism, and suspend the legal processes that threatened her position. It was a move designed to consolidate her power and eliminate all threats, both from outside and within her party. The claim of a national crisis provided the constitutional cover for a decision that was, at its core, aimed at preserving her own political power. The declaration of the emergency was immediately followed by a swift and honestly brutal crackdown on all forms of political opposition. In the pre-dawn hours of June 26, 1975, police began arresting prominent opposition leaders across the country. Jayaprakash Narayan, Morarji Desai, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, L.K. Advani, and hundreds of other political figures, social activists, and trade unionists were taken into custody. They were imprisoned under preventive detention laws, which meant they could be held indefinitely without trial. The government used the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, MISA, to carry out these arrests, effectively silencing any voice that could challenge its authority. The goal was to, decapitate the opposition leadership and crush any potential for organized protest. Simultaneously, the government imposed severe censorship on the press. All news reports, articles, and editorials had to be submitted to government censors for approval before they could be published. Electricity supply to the newspaper offices in Delhi was cut off on the night of the declaration to prevent them from printing the news of the arrests. Any news that was critical of the government, Indira Gandhi, or her policies was strictly forbidden. Many newspapers chose to publish blank spaces where censored articles were supposed to appear as a silent form of protest. Others simply complied with the government's orders. This complete control over information meant that the public was fed only the government's version of events, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. The emergency also led to the suspension of fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Citizens lost their right to freedom of speech and expression, the right to assemble peacefully, and the right to move freely throughout the country. Most critically, the right to approach the courts to challenge an arrest or detention, the writ of habeas corpus, was suspended. This meant that the thousands of people arrested had no legal recourse. The judiciary, which was supposed to be a guardian of these rights, was rendered powerless. The Supreme Court itself, in a controversial judgment, ruled that during an emergency, citizens had no right to life and personal liberty. This decision effectively gave the government unlimited power over the lives of its citizens. During the 21-month period of the emergency, the government pushed through its own agenda with an iron fist. A 20-point program for economic development was announced, but the period is more remembered for its excesses. A controversial mass sterilization campaign, led by Sanjay Gandhi, was implemented with great force, often targeting the poor and powerless. Slums were cleared without providing proper rehabilitation for the displaced people. A culture of fear and sycophancy prevailed, as government officials and party workers tried to please the new centers of power. The democratic fabric of India was torn apart, as dissent was equated with treason and civil liberties were completely suppressed in the name of discipline and national interest. After 19 months of ruling by decree, Indira Gandhi made a surprise announcement in January 1977. She declared that the emergency would be relaxed and that general elections would be held in March. The reasons for this decision are still debated. It is possible that she received misleading intelligence reports, suggesting that she remained popular and would easily win an election. She may have also believed that an electoral victory would legitimize her rule and silence international criticism of her authoritarian regime. Perhaps she felt the shock treatment of the emergency had worked, instilling discipline in the country, and it was now time to return to a democratic framework. Whatever the reason, the announcement caught everyone, including the opposition, by surprise. Following the announcement, the government began to release the thousands of political prisoners who had been jailed during the emergency. Press censorship was relaxed, and political activities which had been banned were once again permitted. The opposition leaders, fresh out of prison, had very little time to prepare for the elections. However, they acted quickly and decisively. The major non-communist opposition parties realized that their only chance of defeating Indira Gandhi was to unite. They set aside their ideological differences and came together to form a new political party, the Janata Party. This alliance, led by veterans like Morarji Desai and with the moral blessing of Jayaprakash Narayan, presented a single, unified challenge to the Congress Party. The election campaign was short but intense. The central issue was democracy versus dictatorship. The Janata Party's campaign focused on the excesses of the emergency, the arrests, the censorship, and the forced sterilizations. They urged the people to vote to restore their fundamental rights and civil liberties. Indira Gandhi's campaign, on the other hand, focused on the need for a strong, stable government and highlighted the economic gains made under her 20-point program. However, the public mood had turned decisively against her. The fear that had silenced people for nearly 2 years turned into a powerful wave of anger that was expressed through the ballot box. The results of the 1977 election were a political earthquake. The Congress Party was overwhelmingly defeated for the first time in India's history. Indira Gandhi herself, along with her son Sanjay Gandhi, lost her own parliamentary seat. The Janata Party and its allies won a massive majority in the Lok Sabha. The people of India, especially in the northern states where the impact of the emergency was most severe, had delivered a clear and powerful verdict. They had chosen democracy over authoritarianism. The election was a remarkable event, proving that even after a period of suppressed rights, the democratic spirit of the Indian people was strong and resilient. It was a peaceful rebellion that restored democracy through the very process that the emergency had sought to subvert. The Janata Party government, which came to power after the 1977 elections, had a clear mandate from the people to restore democracy and ensure that no future government could misuse its power in the way Indira Gandhi had. One of their most important tasks was to undo the constitutional damage done during the emergency. Indira Gandhi's government had passed several constitutional amendments, most notably the 42nd Amendment, which had drastically increased the power of the executive branch and weakened the judiciary. The new government sought to reverse these changes and build stronger safeguards into the constitution to prevent a repeat of the emergency. The result of this effort was the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, passed in 1978. This amendment was specifically designed to make it much more difficult for a government to declare and sustain a state of emergency. Firstly, it changed the grounds for declaring a national emergency. The phrase internal disturbance was replaced with armed rebellion. This was a crucial change because internal disturbance was a vague term that could be interpreted broadly to include protests and agitations, as Indira Gandhi had done. Armed rebellion, on the other hand, set a much higher and more precise standard, implying a violent uprising against the state. Secondly, the 44th Amendment introduced new procedural safeguards. It made it mandatory for the president to declare an emergency only on the basis of written advice from the Union Cabinet. This was to prevent a situation where a prime minister could unilaterally make the decision and inform the cabinet later, as had happened in 1975. The amendment also stated that a proclamation of emergency must be approved by both houses of parliament with a special majority within 1 month. Furthermore, it provided a mechanism for parliament to revoke the emergency, ensuring that the legislative branch had more control over the process. Most importantly, the 44th Amendment restored the power of the judiciary and protected the fundamental rights of citizens. It made it clear that the right to life and personal liberty, guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution, could not be suspended even during an emergency. This reversed the Supreme Court's controversial ruling during the emergency and ensured that citizens would always have the right to challenge their detention in a court of law. By strengthening the judiciary, restricting the executive's emergency powers, and protecting fundamental rights, the 44th Amendment created strong constitutional barriers against any future attempts to impose an authoritarian regime, serving as a vital lesson learned from a dark chapter in India's history. In conclusion, the declaration of the national emergency in 1975 was a watershed moment in the history of independent India. The official reasons provided by Indira Gandhi's government painted a picture of a nation on the brink of collapse. They pointed to the widespread social unrest, the disruptive railway strikes, the political agitations led by Jayaprakash Narayan, and the call for the army and police to disobey orders as evidence of a conspiracy to destabilize the country. According to this official narrative, the emergency was a necessary, though painful, measure to restore order, discipline, and national unity. It was presented as a constitutional step taken to save Indian democracy from the forces of anarchy that threatened to overwhelm it from within. However, a deeper analysis reveals that the actual reasons were more closely tied to Indira Gandhi's personal political survival. The timing of the declaration, coming just days after the Allahabad High Court invalidated her election, and the Supreme Court offered only a partial relief, is too significant to ignore. The judgment posed a direct and immediate threat to her position as Prime Minister. The united opposition was capitalizing on her legal and moral vulnerability, demanding her resignation. The emergency provided a convenient and powerful tool to neutralize all these threats in one single move. It allowed her to silence her political opponents, censor the press, and suspend the very legal system that held her accountable, thus ensuring she remained in power. The legacy of the emergency is complex and has had a lasting impact on Indian democracy. It demonstrated the fragility of democratic institutions and how they could be dismantled from within by a leader with a strong parliamentary majority. It exposed the weaknesses in the original constitution that allowed for such a concentration of power in the hands of the executive. The period also revealed the courage of many individuals, journalists, lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens who resisted the authoritarian regime in various ways. The memory of the emergency serves as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting civil liberties and democratic norms against political overreach. Ultimately, the most important lesson from the emergency was delivered by the Indian people themselves in the 1977 elections. Their decisive vote against Indira Gandhi and the Congress Party was a powerful affirmation of their commitment to democracy. This popular verdict, combined with the subsequent constitutional safeguards introduced by the 44th Amendment, helped to strengthen the foundations of Indian democracy. The emergency, therefore, stands as a dark chapter, but also a crucial learning experience. It taught the nation that democracy is not just a system of government, but a value that must be constantly cherished and defended by its citizens, ensuring that such an abuse of power would not be easily repeated.